So Jeremiah is our text this morning, and it refers to the Exodus, right? And the 10 Commandments written on stone. And what happens is that those 10 Commandments, the stones apparently get broken and carted off. And so Jeremiah the prophet is saying, you don't need those tablets of stone anymore. Now, you've heard Denny talk about Midrash before. It's the Jewish scholarly approach to looking at texts. And what a rabbi will do, or a studier of the Torah, is that they will look at a particular text and draw out from there more meaning for everyday life. So I love that I have these marvelous colleagues, because when I was talking to Denny about this particular text and preparing for my time with you this morning, he said, there's this great midrash about this text. And the question the rabbi looks at is, why does it say that God writes God's law on our hearts? And the rabbi, in pondering this, says, it is because when our hearts break open, God's law falls in. Because when our hearts break open, God's law falls in. And I got goosebumps when I heard that. Now, we all know each other pretty well in this room, most of us. And so we probably know when each of our hearts have broken open. Relationship issues, work issues, health issues. Each of us has had a time with that breaking. The thing with me writing sermons is that I really have to learn to trust what comes my way. I never have a sermon until the 11th hour. Really, like 4 o'clock on Saturday. And so yesterday I'm at the healing service, and I'm sitting holding space in Fellowship Hall with the Labyrinth. And Lee French is walking the Labyrinth, and Laura Maza Dixon and one of her students are playing classical guitar. And I start thumbing through a book that's sitting on the chairs. And it opens to the following story, which I think I was supposed to share today, so I will. So it's about a broken heart. This young man named John, who in his mid-20s was in a terrible car accident and lost his right leg. And he was furious. He was furious and grief-stricken and overcome by this experience that at such young an age, this would happen to him. So he starts going to counseling, and the counselor, as part of their time together, pushes a piece of paper across the table and some colored pencils and says, "Draw me a picture of your body." And John takes up a black crayon, and he draws a picture of a vase. But in this vase is this huge crack, open, gaping crack. And the counselor says it was just painful to watch him draw this picture, because all of his rage and pain and brokenness was just being drawn into this crack over and over again. a broken heart, I think. Another person who knows about broken hearts is Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I knew a little bit about his later life in India and his nonviolence, non-cooperation, and how that led a people to freedom. But I didn't know much about his earlier life. And I was reading recently that when he was a young boy, he was kind of an odd duck. That he was bullied, that he looked different, that he was filled with fear. And he barely made it through high school and sort of failed out of college. And his family sent him off to London to go study law. And he became a barrister. But he, infamously ran out of a courtroom when the judge asked him to argue a very difficult legal point. Now, as a lawyer, I get the impulse to run out of the courtroom. I get that. But I never actually fled. But this young man, he took off and left his client sitting there. He went back to India, where a kind uncle got him a job in South Africa. So his heart starts to open up a little bit, right? When he sees that he's being a failure at being a barrister. But he gets to India, and his heart cracks wide open because he sees the suffering of the Indian people under the South African government. Now, he was a devout Hindu. And one of the tenets of the Hindu religion is this selfless service to others. Very similar, I think, to the summary that Jesus gave us of the law: to love God, to love others as ourself. Now, it's really easy to say, your heart breaks open and God's love or God's law drops in. But what does that really mean, and how does that really happen? So I looked closely at Mahatma Gandhi's life, and I realized that he had this spiritual practice. He had a spiritual practice of, for him, studying, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, but also a mantra that he repeated, which was one of the names for God. And it helped connect him to the divine. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, Sandra, you've got one of those. You do that too. I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. Because I sit here every Sunday morning and I repeat in my head, not me, but you, Lord. Not me, but you. Not me, but you. So that I can stand here and open myself to the divine and hear from my heart the words that share blessing and love and compassion with those around us. Because my mind, it's awfully busy all the time, and it chatters away all the time. But with this repetition of not me, but you, Lord, that mind quiets. And I use it a lot. I use it when I'm listening to my children or my spouse. I use it when I'm in a situation of conflict and need to know how to respond. I use it before I preach, before I go into a meeting. Sometimes I use it when I'm taking a walk. And what it does is it calms my mind and allows those words of love of God and love of neighbor as oneself that my heart is whispering to be heard. So I offer this to you. You may use that anytime you'd like, or anything else that works for you. When I was coming down the mountain this morning to first service, it was music that opened my heart. NPR had Joshua Bell playing Bach. And for just a few moments at a time, my mind stopped and I heard the music. And my heart opened and I was filled with such joy and such love because it was in those moments that that love could be heard. So it is your spiritual practice that you have to find, that I invite you to find, that will work for you. Maybe it's contemplative prayer, or music, or, as I have discovered, a mantra. Now, John, our friend from the earlier story, I don't know what his spiritual practice was. It didn't say in this story. But he must have found one because he transformed and grew and moved through that anger. And he started visiting people in the hospital who were in grief. And it says in this story that he was visiting a woman who was deeply in a depression because she had had a double mastectomy, which I also understand. And she refused to speak to anyone. It says that the radio was playing in this hospital room, and what he decided to do is he took off his prosthesis and put it on the side, and he stood up and he started dancing on one leg. And the woman looked at him and said, "Oh my gosh, man, if you can dance, then I can sing." And she started singing. So he had grown and transformed over a period of years, and he was serving others because of his pain, out of his pain. He met with his counselor again, and they started reviewing their work together. And as they're shuffling through the papers, the counselor finds the picture of the vase. And he grabs this picture and pulls it over, and he says, this one's not done yet." And she said, "All right, well, why don't you finish it?" So she pushes the crayons across the table at him. And he chooses a bright yellow crayon. And he starts filling in the gap in the crack. And he says, "You know, this place, this crack, this is where the light comes through." So may each of you find a way to let that light of God's love to flow out of your broken hearts. Amen.